11,000 votes.
How many? Well, but okay. How many registered voters?
That I don't.
Because they have 40 some odd thousand. So 11,000, you know,
25%.
it's 25%. We have more than we had over 2,000 votes, cast, 3,600 voters. So that's
Yeah, but we had a $45 million referendum. All right, we got to start in 8 minutes. 2 minutes.
Hi, Greg. How's it going, neighbor? How's the kids? Good. It's important. Oh, you know, it was so great. Hi, honey. I went in. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. It was really great. It was just a really nice. If you need it like well, we'll get a gazebo for your wedding. You need it like that's a whole different job.
good. How are you?
Wonderful.
Oh,
Everyone was pretty safe. A lot of it.
good.
Oh, my. True that.
Yep, you can see.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we begin? At 12 noon, call the meeting to order. Please silence your cell phones. Linelda, would you call the roll, please? Oh, Linelda's not here. Would you like to call the roll then?
Commissioner Shoemaker,
Present.
Commissioner David,
Present.
Mayor Hellman,
Present.
Vice Mayor Bobby,
Present.
Commissioner Gossa-Seidman.
Here.
Mayor, we have a quorum, the complete commission here.
Okay.
Glenn's here and I'm here as well. A little more informal, but Glenn and I are here.
Okay. Shall we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Linelda, do we have any public comments?
Mr. Fred Rosen had pre-registered for public comments, but however, he's not available to attend today. And he wanted to thank the staff and commission for their hard work over the past year under the COVID constraints that we were under. And he just wanted to thank everyone.
Oh,
And
very
he
nice.
said that he will thank each commissioner in person later.
Very nice. Are there any others?
There are no additional pre-registered public comments today. Thank you.
Okay, then we will close public comments and we will move on to, well, I have the pleasure of presenting a certificate to our vice mayor. This is the certificate. Whoops, there it goes.
Right under.
Come on.
Where the hell did it go?
It's right underneath you.
Right beneath you?
Literally, yes.
There we go. For all to see.
Upside down.
Upside down. There we go. Okay.
And I just want to say personally, I have very much enjoyed working with you. Your contributions to the town and to the commission itself have been wonderful. I enjoyed debating issues with you. And when one debates, the best of the best comes out, and that's what has occurred. And not only have you contributed to the town while serving on the commission, but also all those times that you served as the chairperson on the Financial Advisory Board. So the town owes you a major thank you. And I certainly hope that we'll continue to see you contributing in the future. I know you're going to take a little bit of time off and get some business done. Okay. But on behalf of the town of Highland Beach, we very much thank you for all that you have done. So thank you and a round of applause.
Thank you, Mayor. Much appreciated. I've enjoyed it as well. It's a great commission. This commission is able to do some really amazing things. We have some pretty significant challenges coming up, but I think it's going to be even better than it is now with the new vice mayor coming on.
Anybody
Yes.
like to say something? Go
I
right ahead.
would. Greg, it's been a pleasure serving with you.
Thank you.
You really brought something special to this commission, and I appreciate it. And I hope that you will continue, that we can contact you for advice and consultation.
I'm
Thank
not
you.
disappearing. I'll be around.
Yes, in the short time that I've had a chance to work with you, clearly you've demonstrated a great handle on finances, statistics. That's a great strength to have on the board. And I think we'll be fulfilled with your successor, somebody who can appreciate the numbers. At the same time, your continued efforts with all things maritime would be greatly appreciated from someone who knows nothing about boats. So I do appreciate the value you've played on the board, and I wish you well.
Thank you, John. And I'm sure Ingrid and I are going to be presenting that very soon.
Yep, we look forward to that.
I'd like to add in a cute story. Back in 2016 and 17, Greg and I had both been approached to run for this office. And I said, you run. And he said, no, you run. And I said, you run. Anyway, we all but flipped a coin. And as it turned out, we both ended up here. And it's been an asset to have Greg. I'm a words person. He's a numbers guy. He's just a very fine neighbor and good friend of the town. Thank you.
Thanks, Beck.
Well, now it's time to move on, but I just want to say one last thing. Not only have I enjoyed working with you, but beyond that, I've really formed quite a nice friendship, and that goes beyond it all. And we will obviously be friends for quite a while. So very much appreciated that.
And to that, it's just the beginning.
Right on. Okay. Moving on. It's time to declare that the general election results. This is resolution number 2021-002, a resolution of the Town Commission of the Town of Highland Beach, Florida, declaring each unopposed candidate elected to the office and providing for an effective date. I need a motion to adopt resolution 20-21 or 2021-002.
I move we accept resolution 2021-002 as presented.
Need a second.
I gladly second it.
This one we need a roll call for.
Commissioner David,
Yes.
Commissioner Shoemaker,
Present?
Commissioner Gossick-Sideman,
Present?
Vice Mayor Bobby,
Yes.
Mayor Hillman.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Now we will move on to the swearing in and the seating of the newly elected officers. And again, thank you, Greg.
First one up is Natasha Moore. You can raise your right hand and repeat after me, but where it says your name, you can state your name.
I, Natasha Moore,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support, protect, and defend
the Constitution
the Constitution
and the government of the United States
and the government of the United States
and of the state of Florida
and of the state of Florida
against all enemies, domestic or foreign,
against all enemies, domestic and foreign,
and that I will bear true faith,
and I will bear true faith,
loyalty,
loyalty,
and allegiance
and allegiance
to the same.
to the same.
And I am entitled to hold office
And I am entitled to hold office
under the Constitution of the United States
under the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the state of Florida,
and the Constitution of the state of Florida,
and that I will faithfully perform
and that I will faithfully perform
all the duties of the Vice Mayor Commissioner
all the duties of the Vice Mayor Commissioner
on which I am about to enter.
about which I'm about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. You can sign your oath.
That's right, it's official.
And we do have a certificate of election for Vice Mayor Moore. You're welcome. Thank you. Commissioner Gossett-Simon.
You can take your seat up here.
Your oath. Okay, I state your name.
Peggy Gossett-Seidman,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support, protect, and defend
the Constitution
the Constitution
and government of the United States
and government of the United States
and of the state of Florida
and of the state of Florida
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
domestic or foreign,
domestic or foreign,
and that I will bear true faith,
and that I will bear true faith,
loyalty, and allegiance
loyalty, and allegiance
to the same.
to the same.
And I am entitled to hold office
And I am entitled to hold office
under the Constitution of the United States
under the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the state of Florida,
and the Constitution of the state of Florida,
and that I will faithfully perform
and that I will faithfully perform
all the duties of the office of Commissioner
all the duties of the office of Commissioner,
on which I am about to enter.
of which I'm about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You can sign your certificate. Yes. Mhm. Thank you. And we do have a certificate of election for Commissioner Gossett-Seidman. You can keep that. Thank you.
And this is yours.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, thank you.
That was my dog, sorry.
No. Well, he's excited.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to the presentation of the fire feasibility study. So we're going to put the new vice mayor to work right away. Okay, and we're ready to begin.
Yes, Mayor. So Robert Finn and Terry Lewis with the Matrix Consulting Group will be joining us here in a moment and be giving us the presentation. You do have a copy of that draft study on the financial feasibility study, and the consultants are basically going to walk us through that, and that will lead us to our initial conversation on this study. Again, this is something we've been working on for about 6 months now that the the commission chose to enter into this agreement with Matrix to really form the foundation of our understanding of what options do exist and how we may want to have that discussion moving forward.
1 second, I'm sorry. I just wanted to introduce Chief Tommy and his associates, if anybody didn't know who he was. Okay. I want to thank you for coming, and he's here to view the presentation, and obviously they are our partners in the fire rescue, providing all of the services. So that's who these gentlemen are.
So, Teresa, are they, there he is. Okay. So as much as I'd like to talk, maybe this is a time I step aside and let the consultant do the work from here.
Okay, I'd like to thank the commission and town administrator for allowing us to present the findings of the fire feasibility study. So in doing this, I think it's important that today, okay, you're going to share it from your end. Okay, that's perfect. So in doing this today, I think today is a more of a high level overview to give the commission an understanding of the study and understanding of the options, and then the opportunity to review the report further and get comments to Marshall of any areas that you would like analyzed further. If you need more information regarding any of the options, or would like more analysis, more detail, or clarification of any of the issues raised, then we would be prepared to come back at one of your regular meetings to present a final draft report. So view this as your draft opportunity, and we're going to be happy to answer any questions. You can stop me as we go along, or we can save the questions for the end. So whatever is more comfortable and appropriate for the commission works well for me. So with that, the next slide. So just real quick, reminding the commission of the study objectives. So it was the feasibility of forming a municipal fire department versus contracting with the city of Delray Beach for the fire and EMS services. So in doing that, we were auditing the current performance of Delray Beach compared to the contract that you have with them, developing what the staffing requirements would be for a municipal fire department, developing the requirements to assume EMS transport services, developing a plan for providing EMS dispatch services, addressing training needs for personnel in the fire department, analyzing the startup and transitional costs, including equipment and facilities, developing an implementation timeline, identifying challenges associated with establishing a fire department, and developing pros and cons of the alternative staffing models that we developed. And with that, we reviewed local agreements that could impact the feasibility of actually forming the study. So next slide. So in terms of the input or the overview, we obtained a lot of input from both Town of Highland Beach elected officials, appointed officials, as well as extensive input from the Delray Beach Fire Department. I think it's important to note that the fire department and Chief Tomey's staff were instrumental in being able to complete this project. They're very timely in providing us data. They were very frank and upfront with any comments and input they gave us throughout the study, and we're really great partners to work with in conducting this feasibility study. We collected a lot of data from them and the town regarding organizational assessments and resources. We looked at the current service delivery model and then assessed options for how future service delivery can be conducted. And throughout the time, we collaborated with staff, had several Zoom meetings with the mayor as well to review the findings, assumptions, and analysis, and refine that before getting you the draft report for input today. Next slide. So when we looked at the current system, the call demand in the town is relatively low. You get about 678 calls per year inside the town on average for the last 3 years. And interestingly enough, you respond as often into Delray Beach at an average of 677 times per year over the last 3 years. So you're making as many calls in town as you are responding into the city of Delray Beach. Correspondingly, Delray Beach responds into the town on average about 139 times per year over the last 3 years to assist in providing services in the town. The majority of your calls are emergency medical calls at 65% of your call demand. The dispatch center is doing an excellent job of processing calls, 57 seconds, 90% of the time. And the gold standard best practice benchmark for dispatching calls is 60 seconds, 90% of the time. So they're right at that, just a little bit below it, which is great. There could be an improvement to turnout times. Right now you're at a minute 55, 90% of the time, where a minute 20 for fire calls and a minute for EMS calls is the best practice. And why this is important is to the caller, if you can improve your turnout time, the amount of time it takes the fire and EMS personnel to get from the station into the apparatus and en route to the call, if that was reduced by, say, that 55 seconds, to the caller, it appears that you're getting to them nearly a minute quicker than you were previously. So this is a good time for most agencies compared to what we see initially if it's not being tracked and there aren't performance standards that are being adhered to related to turnout times. But it's something that can improve with just a little effort. So improving that looks like you're able to perform better to the community. And then the final thing is your travel times, which are consistently under 5 minutes, 90% of the time. And again, that meets industry baseline performance standards. Best practice for NFPA 1710 would be 4 minutes, 90% of the time. But to be honest with you, very few agencies in the country are able to meet that 4 minute benchmark standard. And most have adopted 5 minute and 30 seconds, or 6 minutes and 30 seconds in more of the suburban environments versus dense urban environments. Your highest call demand is currently in the central and southern portions of your town. And when we looked at the unit utilization rate, your ladder is used 3% of the time, and the rescue is committed to calls 7% of the time. So well positioned to be able to continue with the two apparatus staffing model. There's no strain on the units, and that includes both the in-town and out-of-town responses. So there's plenty of capacity for increased call volume for those units without impacting your ability to have effective travel time performance. Next slide. So just a quick chart on the call demand by type, showing you the various calls for service within the town of Highland Beach. Again,
Robert,
yep.
hold on a minute. Would you go back to the previous slide, please?
Sure.
Would unit hour utilization, can you define that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so that's the amount of time a unit is committed to a call. So the dispatcher dispatches the call and they check en route. They're committed to the call at the time of dispatch. For the ladder company, that would typically be arrive at the call and they clear. For the rescues, that would be arriving at the call, and if they transport to the hospital, they're still being utilized. And then if they are unable to go back in service immediately because of disinfecting the unit, then at the time they return back in service, that would be the time. So looking at the total hours available in a year versus the total hours that they're committed to calls and unavailable for other responses, that unit hour utilization.
Are these typical statistics?
They're low. They're not. There's no strain on the system. What you want to do is at 20% unit utilization, you're really looking at the need to add resources, because now your performance would be impacted if call concurrence is also an issue. But in looking at your call concurrence and your unit hour utilization,
So I guess
the number
what
of resources is still appropriate.
How low is low?
Well, like I said, so your goal would be below 20%. So you still got 17% growth in terms of unit hour utilization for the ladder, and 13% for the rescue.
Thank you. Okay.
So again, demand by type, you can see the last 3 years average, where medical and auto accidents has occurred for about 65% of the calls, and then all types of fire calls, including alarms, about 15%, and other rescue type calls about 4%, and then other good intent, hazardous conditions, and those types of calls where somebody just called for services is about another 15% of your call breakdown. Next slide. When we looked at our day and day of the week, very typical for suburban style residential communities. When people wake up, so you can see about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning during the weekday, call demand starts to go up. And later in the evening, when people are home and in bed and there's less activity out, then the call demand starts to decline. So very typical hour of day, day of week call demand for similar communities to you. Next slide. So we looked at the options for fire and EMS service delivery in the town. We came up with 4 distinct different options. Obviously, the status quo, continuing to contract with Delray Beach for fire and EMS services, is one. Forming a municipal fire and EMS department is a second, where you form your own municipal fire department to serve both fire and EMS needs. Kind of a hybrid model where you can provide municipal fire services but contract for EMS services, or there is an option to contract for both fire and EMS services with private providers. And then a public safety model, which takes that municipal fire service, and instead of appointing a fire chief and a second in command for the fire department, you use the current police chief and police lieutenant to be your command staff for both police and fire. There would be a stipend involved in that, which we'll talk about later. And then the town has the option of, again, providing EMS services in municipality or contracting for EMS services as with the hybrid form. Next slide. So looking at the status quo and continuing to contract with Delray Beach, I think it's very important to note the high service levels that you're receiving that we showed earlier. So those service levels are known. Those service levels would continue. You remain part of that 6-station response system. And why that's important is the development of an effective response force, the ability of closest unit response with Delray assets as well as your assets to ensure the closest unit to the call is able to get there and you're not limited to the response from one station. Forming that effective response force for structure fires, although very low in the 3.5 years of data we looked at, you guys had 3 dwelling fires that kind of met the criteria as a working structure fire where there was damage of over $1,000. So the structure fire incidence is rare in your community, but knowing that you've got that depth of system and the assets can be automatically dispatched is a great benefit to the town. And then there's no issues in obtaining the county certificate of public necessity for providing EMS services locally. You continue using Delray as your provider. Some of the issues there, we recently read about a new contract, so there is cost increases that will be associated with the new contract and personnel costs. Delray Beach has also requested that you move your staffing on your rescues from 2-person to 3-person staffing. So there will be increased costs associated with that. There's inequity we found in the way that the transport fees are currently handled in the contract. And what we're discussing there is when you transport with your ambulance for a person in Highland Beach, the town receives reimbursement for any revenues collected from those transport fees. When you transport someone in the city of Delray with your ambulance, the city of Delray retains those transport fees. And conversely, if Delray comes in and transports someone from your town using one of their resources, Delray also keeps the EMS revenues. Typically what you would see in this case is the town's funding the ambulance, the town's funding the personnel, the town is funding the cost of the equipment and supplies. And on a transport made by the town rescue, the town would typically retain that revenue. So that's something that's not in the contract, but if you choose with the status quo, we would encourage you in any renegotiating of the contract to make sure that you're fully compensated for the revenues due the town on patients transported by your rescue. We also found an issue of the charging actual costs versus the in-rank average for personnel assigned to Highland Beach. So the way the city's determining your estimated costs at the beginning of the year is using that in-rank average of personnel in Delray Beach. So they use the in-rank average, they determine the cost, but then when the true-up figures are determined, that's based on the actual costs of the personnel. Now, why is that an issue for both agencies involved? So the in-rank average ensures that regardless of who bids the station or who's assigned to the station, you're paying the average cost of all employees across that rank structure. So for the captains, the driver engineers, the firefighter paramedics, you're paying the average of the current personnel. Using the actual, two things can happen. One, Delray could ensure that the most tenured people are assigned to your station. Obviously, those personnel would cost the most in the actual cost because they're at the higher end of the pay scale. Conversely, Highland Beach could request of Delray Beach, hey, send us your lowest tenure people because we don't want to pay higher costs. And then those personnel would be at a lower cost, or there's no control in terms of who bids the station if it's more of a bidding method for station assignment. And if the more tenured people are bidding your station because it's a little slower and they don't want to be up all night running calls versus the younger folks that are interested in that kind of activity, again, you would end up with a more tenured staff and it would cost the town more by using that actual cost versus the in-rank average, which is how the costing is explained to supposed to occur in the contract. Next slide. So in a municipal department, this would be where the town establishes a fire and EMS department. The pros on this are you control all aspects of staffing, emergency service delivery. You determine the pay scale, you determine the benefit rates, you determine the PERS allocation. So the town has full control of the costs of providing fire EMS services. Using your existing station, as we showed earlier, your current response times from that station are excellent in terms of travel time at under 5 minutes, 90% of the time. And when we costed it out, we found the cost would be lower than the current contract services for fire and EMS services with Delray. Next slide. In terms of issues, you're going to have to form that town fire department. So you're going to have to amend the town code of ordinance to make sure you legally form a fire department or Department of Public Safety, depending on the model chosen. You're going to have to recruit a fire chief, the operations personnel and administrative staff. It's going to require acquisition of apparatus and some capital improvements to the station to house the reserve apparatus that are suggested in terms of the number of apparatus you need to ensure you've got appropriate apparatus in case one breaks down, you've got a backup to still be able to respond to calls. It would require additional town staff in the form of a human resource specialist to help onboard all these folks, develop job descriptions, to handle the benefit packages, to begin the Family Medical Leave Act requirements, as well as Affordable Care Act provisions, as well as a part-time finance specialist to assist with payroll, the increases in purchasing, and the other aspects of forming this department. If there was any early termination of the contract, it does also require compensation to Delray Beach for surplus personnel. So for example, if you were to terminate the contract with cause or without cause immediately, there's a provision in there where you pay for those surplus personnel for up to 3 years. So and we costed that out later. So in looking at a municipal department, we recommended either letting the contract expire if this was the route you were going to go, or providing notice of at least 3 years and letting those excess personnel costs be used to staff the current station. And then you would have some overlap costs as you're beginning to ramp up your fire department so that it's fully operational at the time that the termination clause goes into effect after that 3-year period. And then there's also just the issues of working with the county to get that certificate of public necessity so that you are able to provide emergency medical service transport services in the town. Next slide. In terms of the implementation timeline, year 1 is bringing on the chief and making sure that that person is onboarded, brought online, and the chief can then begin to recruit his fire marshal, the captain to oversee fire prevention functions, as well as the administrative assistant, the training officer, which those folks will be brought on in year 2, which then would be spent mainly developing job descriptions, policies, and all the aspects related to being able to open the fire department and be operational in year 3 while you're hiring the captains, driver engineers, and firefighters. So this staffing model would result in the need for 22 personnel to staff the municipal fire department in the town. Next slide. In terms of the implementation costs, you can see.
Robert, I don't,
Yes, yes.
the previous slide.
Yeah.
So on this slide, year 1 total, where is the 4 coming from?
I just noticed that that's a typo from that wasn't cleaned up in an edit where Marshall and I worked through changing the hiring timelines. So that just needs to be updated.
I have another question. So for year 3, the operational staff, and I think this operational staff is your assumption going forward, 18 people. When I looked at the 2016 Barrier Island study, it looked like the recommendation for the staff per station was 21 operational individuals. The recommendation from Delray Beach prior to the addition of the 3 was 22 and a half. Can you explain why there's such a big difference between your recommendation today of 18 versus 21 from the Matrix study in 2016 versus Delray Beach's recommendation of 22 and a half?
Yeah, so in the Barrier Island study, they were looking at using the same model as the rest of the county for that 3-person rescue staffing, which was coming on board at that time. So similar to what Delray is suggesting for the town to use that 3-person staffing model on rescues. With Delray, the way the staffing model is derived is to determine time off at each of the rank structures and build in that leave factor to arrive at the number of personnel needed. So this staffing model, what you have is, in a sense, 4 personnel on the ladder, 2 on your rescue, and a minimum daily staffing of 3 on the ladder and 2 on the rescue. So that allows 1 person to be off each shift before overtime would occur. So you can have one either scheduled or unscheduled absence per shift without overtime occurring. A typical model for suburban agencies.
So are you saying your model does not allow for time off?
It does allow for time off. It allows
following.
one person off per shift.
Okay, so 18 allows for like the holiday pay, the education, and the time off that's needed for the operational staff.
Correct. So then what happens beyond that? So say, for example, one firefighter's on vacation and a firefighter calls in sick, then at that point, to be able to ensure you have minimum staffing, you would call in overtime to backfill the apparatus with overtime. And the overtime projections are built into the costing models.
Okay, I didn't see the overtime in the costing model, so you'll have to point that out to me.
Yeah,
I'm
it's,
still a little fuzzy on the difference between 18 and 22 and a half. I mean, I'm not convinced that 18 is enough. And, you know, and then we have to have an additional chief, and we have to have the additional captain and the administrative assistant plus the HR. So like the difference in the staff amounts to, I think, over $600,000 a year. So, I mean, I just think we need to pay close attention to the adequate staffing levels that we would need.
Hold a note on that and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
But let's make sure we come back to it.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Are we going to complete Robert's presentation and then ask questions? Because I had questions too. I just wanted to check in on the point of
As we
order.
go through it, if there's a slide or a statement that he's making that you
Mhm.
have a question on that specific piece,
Right.
obviously, no question, bring it up. But at the end, we'll have a complete Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, continue, please.
so in terms of the implementation costs of the municipal department, so based on bringing staff on board, purchasing needed equipment, as well as vehicles and apparatus, year one, you'd be looking at 140,579, and realize this would be in addition to continuing with the contract costs, as would year two at 549,436. And then year three, you would bring your staff on once they're trained and you become fully operational. There's an additional $2,901,318 in salaries, equipment, and vehicle and apparatus costs. So then at that point, your startup costs and onboarding folks is completely done, and then you move into the typical annual budgets that we have developed in the report. Next slide. So when you look at your overall costs, and there's a detailed line item breakdown in the report, but obviously it wouldn't fit or be viewable on a PowerPoint slide, so we did a summary slide. So you'd be looking at a little over $3 million at the start if it was in FY22 in terms of the fire department costs, and then another 174,355 in indirect costs for the town personnel, and then that moves through. And just to keep it clean so that you could see that if you were to give the notice now but not start the fire department until FY25, that you would expect a 3.32 million total cost for the fully functional fire department at the time that it was to begin operations. Next slide. So the hybrid system is where you form a town fire department, but you use contract personnel to staff the EMS function. With that, it's very similar to the town department. You would still have to get the certificate of necessity. However, you would be contracting with a private EMS provider or other agency to provide your EMS transport services to alleviate you of all the functional duties of EMS supply procurement, licensing the ambulances, licensing the EMS personnel, getting medical direction and control, developing protocols, and just all the things that go with the operating a fully functional emergency medical services transport system. So again, in this model, you would control all the aspects of staffing, emergency service delivery for the fire portion. You would have control over the EMS side through contract negotiations. Again, you're using your existing station, so the response times to emergencies remain similar to today. You'd be using that EMS contract service versus using a municipal EMS department. And again, alleviating yourself of a lot of the administrative factors of running an emergency service system. You wouldn't be responsible for billing. You wouldn't be responsible for revenue collection. The private provider would do the billing and retain revenues in this case. So you would see a revenue decline in terms of EMS transport, but again, they'd be taking the risk of what the collection rates would be on those EMS transport revenues. And again, the hybrid system, as with the municipal system, while more than doing it alone, the costs are lower than the contract service costs, but there is the benefit of not having all those administrative needs that come along with the running an EMS transport agency. Next slide. So again, the issues with this, you're going to have to amend your town of code of ordinances to legally form the department. You're still going to have to recruit the fire chief, the operations personnel, and the administrative staff related to fire department functions. You're still going to have to acquire apparatus and make facility improvements. However, in this model, you would only need the reserve engine, as the EMS provider would have reserve ambulances available if the ambulance were to break down and you needed a replacement ambulance. It still would require the HR specialist and the part-time finance specialist to assist with those personnel and finance related needs. It would require negotiation of contract with a private EMS provider, similar to how you negotiate with Delray Beach today. There could be opposition from the local firefighters union in terms of bringing in a private EMS provider, as they would view that as reducing the number of union members in the area. So costing union members their employment because of private EMS coming in could cause opposition from the union. Is just something that you should be aware of. Again, early termination of the contract would require paying for those surplus personnel, as with the municipal department. So we would, again, this option, we would advise the town to give the minimum 3 years notice, or just let the contract ride out and expire. And then you would have the same issues here with obtaining the county certificate of public necessity, because with a private EMS provider, the town would have that county certificate of public necessity, but would be contracting for someone else to provide those transport services. So you would still need the certificate and would be the primary in terms of the county EMS agency goes. Next slide. So this implementation timeline, again, year one, you're bringing on those administrative staff to get things rolling. There would be no one brought in year two. That year would be solely, and we have to cost it out for those folks to come in around mid-year of year one. So you, in the early part, you're doing recruiting and you bring the chief on first, and the chief would start recruiting the additional personnel. Year two spent with policies and procedures and getting all those systems up to date. And then year three, bringing in your fire personnel, the contract EMS starts, and you're able to start your fire operations at that point. So this would have a total of 16 personnel in the fire department, because you're not staffing those EMS units, you're using contract personnel. Next slide. So in terms of implementation costs, when you're looking at salaries and benefits, year one, 140,579 because of that partial year of salaries. In year two, they go to the full year salaries. You're purchasing more equipment, more staff vehicles. And then in year three, you're becoming fully operational for the year three costs of 2.157 million.
Well, that doesn't jive with the previous slide.
You've got less personnel.
Yeah, the previous slide had all the personnel coming in the first year.
Yes, so year one is partial year costs for your personnel costs. With the
But you're bringing them in late in the year or towards the end of the first year.
right, so the chief's coming in earlier, the others are coming in later. So you're purchasing the equipment and the chief vehicle, and then in year two, the chief and the other folks are a full year, and you're purchasing the rest of the equipment and second vehicle. And then in year 3, you're moving toward being fully operational. So
Okay.
year 1's reflected as a partial.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. So again, the personnel, operating, and indirect costs associated with the hybrid system, you can see your personnel costs go down to 2.3 million. However, your indirect costs are the same for the human resources and the finance person. And then you've got another $1 million estimated for contracting with the EMS provider. And then we had a 5% annual increase factored into that ongoing, as we did with all the budget assumptions. And again, that's just to show what, according with current financials, what it would look like to start in year 1, but you would have those Delray costs on top of this. So we wouldn't recommend that as a starting point. But if you carry it out to FY25, you can see what those startups costs were, total operational costs of 3.77 million a year. Next slide. So the final one.
The other one, I didn't get a chance to digest the whole thing.
Okay. Yep.
Just hold it for a moment, please. Thank you.
So the final is the public safety concept. And this is where the town establishes a public safety department. The police chief and police lieutenant continue leading police services, but they also lead fire services. And because of the small nature of your police and fire departments, the spans of control would still work in terms of number of folks being supervised by any one person due to the daily shifting. So again, in this model, you control all aspects of the staffing, the salaries, the benefits, and costs associated with providing emergency services. The existing station is used to respond to and provide calls. So your response reliability and response times are going to be similar to what they are today. The costs here are lower than the current contracted cost for services. And because of the use of the police chief and police lieutenant and providing them assignment pay, which I'll talk about in a little more detail, the costs are lower because your administrative costs now don't include that of bringing on a fire chief. And the training person would do the training for both police and fire, and then manage that function as well as the police accreditation function. So in this, the way we costed it out was using the contract EMS provider, again, to eliminate the need for the administrative oversight from the town and providing those EMS services and all the other issues regarding running EMS transport services. But we also factored in the opportunity to potentially cross-train police personnel. So in this option, police personnel would be trained as EMS first responders as well as firefighters, and they can, during critical emergencies, function in a needed role. So if they were the first on scene at a cardiac arrest, they would be able to immediately provide care, because now you've basically got assets that are mobile and not just responding from the fixed station, but these folks are on patrol and could potentially be closer to an emergency in areas that are further away from the fire station. So this model, we used assignment pay. So therefore, if the assignment of being a public safety person and being cross-trained, or the assignment of being a dual role police chief, fire chief, police lieutenant, fire administrator, were to go away, then that assignment pay would go away, and it wouldn't be impacted by their base pay in terms of what their current base pay is. So it's only for those additional duties. Next slide.
Robert, would you expand on the cross-training of the police personnel? Cross-training for fire assistants and EMS assistants?
Yeah, typically they're trained at the basic life support level to be able to provide the basic care until the advanced life support services can arrive. The firefighting training would be to be able to assist with firefighting functions So the system I came from, we were a public safety model, and it took on a number of things. While we were small and operating from one station, we always had two public safety officers, is what we call them, on the police side, and two assigned to the fire side. And they transferred back and forth to keep them provisioned on both sides. And in the model we have for you, it was police that were cross-trained to assist fire when needed, but their primary responsibility remained police. But it puts those trained folks out in the field. Their beat would typically be the areas not immediately adjacent to the station that have longer response times. So if there was a medical emergency or incident, they could get on scene. They could either begin emergency medical care or provide that size up of what the fire emergency looks like, locate the hydrants, locate any built-in fire protection systems that may need to be hooked up to by the responding crews, and just provides that advanced trained person to be able to assist with those operations.
On the EMS side, if necessary, could they operate as a third person in a transport situation to the hospital?
They could. So if you're in that, so say it's a CPR type call and they need that third person on the ambulance, they could. Obviously, we would caution you on that type of a staffing approach to make sure you retain adequate police protection in the town. If you only had, you wouldn't want to send your only officer off on a transport out of the city just in case a police emergency came in. So you'd want to make sure that there was appropriate police protection if that type of a situation were used.
No, that's never the case. We're always 3 people on in our town.
Yeah. So if the town was okay with, in that, say, 1 hour that they're transporting the patient and taking them to the hospital and then returning back to service, and of having 2 police personnel, or, it could be that that only occurs during daytime hours when there is also sworn administrative police personnel there, so that the chief can then be the backup person if there is a critical emergency that needs that third person to respond, or the lieutenant.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Hartman. We're 3 on 24/7. Is that not correct?
Not always. We have a minimum staffing of 2
2 at night?
per shift, sometimes 3. We allow for leave time, time off, that type of thing. So we have a built-in, we require a minimum staffing for officer safety, 2 officers on at a time.
Okay.
So there are times that we do only have 2 officers.
Roughly what percent of the time are we down to 2?
Mostly some of the late night, overnight timeframes.
Gotcha. So generally speaking, we're 3.
Correct.
Okay. Something for us to think about. Thank you. Okay.
So again, in this, it's you're going to have to revise the town code of ordinances to form the public safety department, which includes both a police and fire division, or whatever you want to call the police and fire services. You would have to recruit those operations personnel and any additional administrative staff that are needed. You have to acquire the apparatus and do the facility improvements for that reserve apparatus. You're still going to have an HR specialist and part-time finance specialist to assist the town with those added needs. Again, we would caution you about the early termination of the contract with Delray Beach, which requires payment for those surplus personnel. Depending on the staffing model, you could negotiate the contract with a private EMS provider, or if you chose to do the municipal EMS staffing, obviously that would increase the staffing related to providing that. And if that's an option that the commission wants looked at deeper, we can cost that out as a second public safety option if that's something you want looked at. If you go with the private model, again, you may have that same opposition from firefighter union, and then the same issue with the county certificate of public necessity, which would be required whether you were transporting as a municipal department or as using a private transport company. Next slide. So again, this model, because the police chief and the police lieutenant are already on board, there's no onboarding of those. You'd be bringing on that fire marshal position in year one, and then bringing on those operational positions in year three to become fully operational for a total of 13 personnel. Next slide. So the salaries and benefits, the first year is associated with that assignment pay. So now the police chief and police lieutenant are beginning to develop policies, begin the process of job descriptions and onboarding the new personnel so they would get their assignment pay. We factored in $20,000 for the chief and $15,000 for the lieutenant. Year two, you've got the full costs of the fire marshal along with those assignment pay costs, getting the equipment and the vehicle for the fire marshal once that position is fully onboarded. And then year three, the full costs of operating the public safety model, which with everything for that full first year, once you're up and running, comes out to $2.08 million. Next slide. So again, looking at the total costs, if you were to do this option using the private EMS model, you're at about $3.47 million in FY22 dollars. But again, you would have those Delray Beach costs in addition if you were to use any one of these models and end the contract early. So then moving out to 2025, you're looking at $3.48 million for the total cost of the system, and then at FY27, 3.801. Again, using that same 5% cost increase per year that we did with all the other staffing models, just to make sure everything was equal in terms of cost projections and increases. Next slide. So when we look at the comparisons, just to give you a comparisons of all those together instead of having to look across the slides, you can see using FY 2022 dollars. And it's important to note that this does not include that new contract. So Marshall and I spoke yesterday, and if that's something the commission wants us to update based on the new contract numbers, again, we'd be happy to put those new numbers in to reflect the new salary changes that have been negotiated for the positions in the fire department. But you're looking at a low of $3.2 million for the municipal department, up to a high of $5.14 million for the status quo with the hybrid municipal EMS being 3.54. And if you went with the public safety model, obviously there's cost savings because you're not hiring the fire chief and the other administrative fire captain for the training. You having administrative folks perform both functions. And then again, just knowing that any early termination would be approximately $4.14 million in year one, $4.76 million in year two, and $5.5 million in year three if you were to terminate early. So that would be in addition to any of the municipal options that we showed you. So again, that's why because it would roughly double your costs of providing fire services in the town, we would recommend either letting the contract naturally expire and not renewing, or making sure that you do give a minimum of 3 years and use that time to do the implementation plan and slowly onboard and bring the organization operational. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that the commission has.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we start off down here to my right with John?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for a comprehensive consulting report. I think it took quite a bit of time for a lot of reasons, but I think you finally delivered something that we can really work with and sink into. I need to go to the options right away. It looks like according to the way you've outlined our options, that we really only have 4, maybe 5 if you split the 2 hybrids. I'm thinking you have 6 options for the town. So I'd like to just quickly identify them and understand why you decided to just focus on these. Clearly, we have the current option. Negotiate that, renegotiate that, trying to fix it with Delray. That's an option. Secondly is having both the town and both fire and EMS operated by the town. So we would have our own total. That's your municipal option. The third one would be both fire and EMS being under contract. Fourth one would be fire, town fire, and contract EMS. Fifth one is your public safety, which is kind of merging police and fire and still contracting EMS. Yet it would seem to me from the numbers that what's most important for the town, just in terms of ability to deliver a service that is under constant need, not to minimize police, but EMS is certainly more important just from a numbers point of view. So it would seem that another option would be to contract fire and have our own town EMS. Was that not a consideration, or is there a fundamental infrastructural problem with contracting fire?
No, there are companies that do contract and provide private fire. In discussions with the town personnel, there were no, what they viewed as really no viable other fire agencies operating in the county that were interested. So Boca, they indicated was not a real option. The only other potential option would be Palm Beach County if the town was to do that versus a private provider. So because private firefighting is not common in the town, and it could lead to difficulties with getting automatic or mutual aid agreements with your neighbors, which you're going to need in those rare instances when you do have larger incidents. We just felt that going on the EMS side would make more sense for privatization because it has less impact on automatic and mutual aid, as long as everybody's running under the same county guidelines for EMS. And it kind of took the firefighting politics out of it and minimize that impact to the town. But we can definitely cost it out and vet it.
I mean, I don't know if you can dismiss the idea. We haven't had any negotiations recently with Boca that I understand. So why would we discount any potential to have a contract agreement with them to give us fire so that we can really focus on EMS? Given when we look at the two, there's a whole lot more need, calls, numbers, response time requirements, and so forth, given our population, the age, 65 and over represents half the town, that there's a real critical need for EMS. Whereas fire, how many fires do we have? I mean, you've detailed the numbers, they're really low. But okay, so that's an area I think we need to take a look at. But if I go back over your whole presentation, which again is quite good. On the positive side, and I'm asking for you, I'm going to relay my thoughts, my views from initially going through this, 3 times, just trying to scan it first, get a little bit deeper into it, and then really get into the numbers. It's not easy for someone who's just doing it for the first time. But my impression is this, on the positive side, the service that we're getting from Delray is the gold standard. It is absolutely superb. It's excellent. I could use more superlative, whatever descriptions, but there's no doubt about it. The calls, the response time, all of it, I don't think you can get much better without spending more money. Then you have this whole blanket protection concept where Delray keeps us covered from the ocean side to the high rise. So we've got the full breadth of fire and EMS protection. At the same time, best practices, not only in the past, today, and going forward, we can expect that we have a best practice rails to run on. There's a lot of confidence that comes with that. And lastly, their ability to support Highland Beach for a disaster, a type of disaster that, requires the full magnitude of the assets and capabilities of Delray's fire, top notch. Now, however, when I step back and I say, whoa, we certainly give a lot more to Delray from our one station than we get. I mean, not only in terms of personnel, equipment, response time, calls, the amount of time our people spend time in Delray supporting their emergencies and so forth. We're contributing more than we're getting, not by a little. It's a magnitude difference. The contract seems to be an embarrassment. I mean, okay, I'm from the business world. I've read a lot of contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts, both in the US and quite a bit overseas. I've never read a contract as poorly written as this one. Now, I'm sorry I'm making that kind of accusation, but it really is a contract that leaves Highland Beach at a serious disadvantage. And that's unfortunate because I think it does not speak to the quality of the Delray Fire Department. It speaks to a contract that was developed by people who are no longer here, I think on both sides. Maybe I'm wrong there, certainly on this side. So you have a contract that's kind of broken. You also have a contract that's mismanaged in terms of how we're supposed to be billed. And probably as bad, if not worse, trying to understand how we're being billed when we ask the consultant, and please, again, support this or not, when we try and dig into how you bill us, why you bill us, where are the statistics, that's not available, or it's questionable. And I'm not even sure now, and I need your statement on this, do we feel comfortable about it? You know?
Where are you going here, John?
So I'm just giving the overall, that's my overall perception. What about what I've said is either wrong or maybe exaggerated? That's my point.
So I would agree that what you're paying for now is definitely a high level service. You're getting that gold standard that you're talking about. There's no question that Delray Beach is providing exceptional services to the town. As I mentioned, you get the benefit of being part of that larger response system. And like you said, if there was a large scale event or major emergency in the town, you've got those immediate resources. I would also agree with you that the contract as written today definitely favors Delray in terms of the language of the contract. And that's the things that we tried to point out in that contract section to say, if you were to continue with the status quo, we would recommend looking into these things and making sure that A, you're getting fully reimbursed for what you're entitled to, or, conversely, if it's the opposite was found, that you're paying your fair share. But the key, I think one of the important things is Delray's brought in that new finance person, and she was great to work with. And in the conversations, it seems like there's some improvements in the financial accounting and the reliability of the finance data now and moving forward. Obviously, that's dependent on the person in the seat. But we have a lot more confidence in the more recent financial information we were provided than the historical in terms of its reliability and really painting the true picture. For the town, it's negotiating a contract that's fair to both parties, knowing now what we're going to, as part of this 6-station response system, we expect to give you more aid than we receive. And, maybe there should be some financial benefit to the town for that. If you're using the in-rank average, make sure you're charging the in-rank average. Just those various little key components, making sure that you're fairly compensated for the transports that your unit that you're paying for and the personnel you're paying for, that you're reimbursed for the transports that they actually do. versus only ones that are done in town with town residents. So, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. So there's a lot of benefit to the current system, but it does come at a cost.
Thank you.
Evelyn?
Okay, several things. Initially, you talked about the response time. Does the response time within Highland Beach, is that affected by outside calls, by the number of calls that come in from stations that are not in town? I mean, because that's going to make a difference with how long it takes to get someplace, if it's coming from Linton Boulevard as opposed to in the middle of town.
Yeah, so what we found looking at the response time performance, that those calls out of town were not greatly impacting your travel times. You might be able to see some improvement if they were reduced, but call concurrence, so that's calls that occur simultaneously where you're involved in one call and another call comes in requiring apparatus to be deployed from somewhere else. They're fairly rare in the town where you've got multiple calls occurring at once. So because that's not happening, going out of town doesn't impact it, because your units are typically in service when a call occurs, because you're not having multiple calls while you're out of town where another call occurs. But in those instances where your unit is out of town, responding to another call and a call occurs, yes, it would impact the response time for those specific calls.
But also, wouldn't it impact the response time for when the truck here and the EMS goes into Delray, because that's further away?
Well, there's
Takes them longer to respond there.
So when you look at the way the current system is evolved, each station has a response area, first due response area, and there is a portion of your station in Delray Beach where you're the first due because it's the closest apparatus. So I'm sure the chief can better explain exactly what that area is than I can, but there is a small portion of Delray where if 911's called, you are the first due station because you can get there more timely than any other stations.
So then I could assume that would, at least in part, account for the fact that it's almost split 50-50 where they are responding in Delray as opposed to responding within Highland Beach.
Yes, very, very even split, almost identical.
Okay. To me, that doesn't seem appropriate, but okay. You said that you were familiar with public safety models. How successful are they? How many towns across the country approximately use them? What's the size of the towns? Because if we're going to even think about it, we need to know really how well they work.
So it really varies by area, and I couldn't give you an exact number of how many there are out there. And typically what you see is they evolve over time as the jurisdictions figure out what best meets their needs. So I can give you, so for example, Highland Park, Texas, which is a wealthy suburb, basically surrounded by the city of Dallas. They use the model. Their model is where you work patrol 8 hours, then you go to the fire station for 8 hours, then your final 8 hours, you're in rest. And they got varying start times of their shifts. And then only if there's an urgent call or the people in the rest mode woken up, similar to a fire department call. So in that model, everyone's cross-trained. They provide all the functions and they rotate through the services. Like I said, the model I was in, we had public safety officers when we were a one-station town that were out there because we had areas identified that took longer than desired to get to. So they were the first due unit and could provide that initial fire size up or EMS service in the field. And then we responded from the station. Then as our city grew and we had 3 stations, that model really wasn't needed anymore. So the field public safety model ended, and our public safety model now is more administrative, where it's joint training, joint internal affairs, joint accreditation, joint records and those types of items. So those administrative and support functions happen jointly, but emergency response now is a separate fire from police emergency response. Other agencies, and I believe it's Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm not sure if they're still operating that or not, but at one point they were operating under a public safety model as well. So large as that urban environment. But typically what you see it is in smaller jurisdictions where spans of control can still be done to handle administrative functions, and or there's the need for deployment of resources differently than what the single fire station can effectively respond to in a timely manner.
Commissioner David, could I just comment?
Sure.
Having worked in Highland Park in Texas, outside of Dallas, they are not much bigger than us, but they have a central shopping area that's high end, and they have some mansions, and it's a wealthy community. They also recently had a hurricane, and from some friends that I have there, the police fire responded extremely well. They did work together. There was nothing but praise, and was a sample for Dallas, the city of Dallas, which has lots of problems. Just as a backup to what you were saying, sir.
Okay, so that makes it a viable alternative. It's not just kind of a pie in the sky.
Let me jump in here for a second, if I may. Robert, would you explain how the transport function works if we went in that direction with public
So private EMS.
private EMS?
So most of the time, what the private EMS systems do, and you got to remember that they're a for-profit entity, so they're maximizing the unit utilization. So you see much higher unit utilization hours in private EMS. So your initial responding unit would not necessarily be a transport unit. It would be the unit that goes to the scene, begins the assessment, begins the care of the patient. And when it's determined that this is a call that's going to require transport to the hospital, a separate transport unit is brought in again, and they stage those across areas to ensure their response times can be met, but there's longer response times for that transport unit, because typically your scene times for an emergency medical call are around 20 minutes. So that gives them that 10 minutes to be able to respond while the patient's getting that initial care. And then the care is transferred from the responding rescue unit to the transport rescue unit. Not to say that your rescue unit could not do the transport if there was the immediate need, but their model would be that that unit would stay in town to be available for the next call while a different unit transported to the hospital. And that's that unit's sole function, is the transport of patients, because there's typically more calls for service than there are transport calls. So it makes sure that the transport units are highly utilized in terms of the efficiency of making the most transports in their shift.
Well, I know currently we already have a certain amount of overlap, because if somebody calls for EMS, the ladder truck shows up, the ambulance shows up, and the police show up every time. So there is already overlap there. So that wouldn't really be adding a whole lot to what we needed. But I agree that it makes sense if a lady falls in her apartment and doesn't have the strength to lift herself up, we don't need a ladder truck there. EMS personnel, or with the help of a police officer, certainly can lift this person up, which I know there are a lot of calls like that.
I think you're mixing apples and pears on that. Okay. This transport situation is yet another company. So what happens is it gets turned over to a third company, third party.
No, it would be the same provider,
Public
just
service.
just a different unit.
It's a different unit of the same firm.
Right.
But they would then make a call that this person didn't have a stroke, so they don't have to get to the hospital in the next, whatever, 6 minutes. So they can wait. They have a broken leg, so they can wait for the transport unit.
Yeah, in any event, if the initial responding unit, so, XYZ ambulance is your provider, and so they're going to respond to the call. They're going to make the determination of whether or not it's a transport call. And then at that point, a transport unit is dispatched immediately, regardless of whether it's because of cardiac arrest, because of a broken leg. But if it's the example she gave where someone just fell out of bed and needs a lift assist, then there would be no transport unit dispatched. It would just be that initial responding unit, but same company.
Yeah, I'm referring to when a transport is required, this person has to go to the hospital.
It's the
Somebody-
same company, just a different type of unit. So they've got the initial response rescues and then the transport rescues.
Yeah, but is it that somebody on the scene is going to make a determination whether they have to rush this person to the hospital, therefore they can't wait the extra 10 minutes or so for a transport unit. Therefore,
Right.
this
Correct.
has to take them now, or they all wait.
Yeah, and that's just based on the response system. There could be times where if there was not a transport unit immediately available and it was going to be delayed, that yes, your unit could transport. That makes sense. It wouldn't be
So-
the normal process because they like to keep their units in service and utilized. So
I understand that. So somebody on the scene makes a decision whether that patient is going to wait or not.
yeah, if it was a critical call and they said the closest transport unit, we'll just make up a number, is 30 minutes away because it's a rare time when
30 minutes. If I go
when
10
all the services are busy, then that unit would transport. Your unit that responded would then transport immediately because obviously the patient needed immediate transport versus you couldn't wait 30 minutes.
Okay, so what we're saying is this patient's life is in the hands of that technician. Make that.
But it's an EMS technician.
It's an EMS technician.
And the police, we're assuming, will also be medically trained to some degree.
To a very limited degree.
The point is that
All I'm trying to say, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
is it isn't the best of all alternatives. Right now, we have the best of all alternatives.
gold
The
standard.
patient goes immediately to the hospital. Bing.
Yeah.
There's no wait.
But with an EMS that is there, makes the judgment that if this is an emergency, get them to the hospital, then it's done. If it's not an emergency where hospitalization is required, then they call for transport.
They don't call for transport because they're not transporting them. They're not going to the hospital.
Well, if it's a non-emergency, still needs to go to the hospital.
Oh, then no problem. Then there's no problem at all. Right.
Well, my thought was that if the police can get there first because they're closer, certainly in a non-emergency, they can make that judgment call.
And that's the majority of the time.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking, was that's a great aid. And that speeds
Absolutely.
up everything. And as you said, they can locate the fire hydrant. They can do a lot of initial things before
Yeah.
EMS or the ladder
Yeah.
truck actually gets there.
The only reason I bring this up is our obligation to our residents is we're dealing now with life safety. So we have to be prepared for the worst case,
Oh.
not the best case.
No,
Yes.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
But if you have somebody who's there first, sometimes, not every
It's a
time,
big,
they,
huge help.
yes, they can make the decision to some
Yeah.
extent.
No question.
You didn't mention anything about 911 calls. Would we have to set up our own system, or should we set up our own system in that
No,
case?
and so we had mentioned in the report that Palm Beach County would likely be the provider. We didn't know if there was going to be any additional costs associated with that, but we did get word actually yesterday. So we're going to include that language in the revised final draft that county dispatch services are something that's paid by all the taxpayers. So it's already included in your general county services.
Okay. Let's see what else. Well, it seems to me that other than keeping the status quo, no matter what we do, there will be overlap periods.
Yes.
And I also don't see how in year one, it could be the full cost because there's no way we would be able to get anything operational in that period of time. I would think it would be at least 18 months to 2 years to truly become operational. So you're going to, assuming that we would cancel the contract this year, I can't see any benefit to canceling the contract and having our own service at the same time. If we have to have a 36-month lead time, then we have a 36-month lead time, and it just gives us extra time to decide what it is exactly we want to do. I also don't see, if we decide that we're going to go that route, the benefit of letting the contract run out. That last 2 years, it doesn't seem to me it makes sense to pay the higher costs. I don't understand really why you didn't mention that.
So the key is really working backwards. So for whatever date you determine that the contract ends, and say it's 3 years from then, 3 years, we'll just pick a date. So October 1st starts the clock, and 3 years from October 1st, you plan on being operational. Well, you would back up then that 2.5 year timeline that we gave you to implement, knowing that's when you really need to start getting things moving. And you will have those overlap costs in addition to the contract costs while the startup occurs.
Oh, absolutely. There's no way around that. That's a given. How difficult would it be to get a certificate of necessity from the county?
It's just the steps that are involved in making sure that you comply with everything, all the requirements. And right now they've got set timelines, but according to the county official, those may change in the next 2 years, or they may not. So it's not difficult. It's just making sure that you're able to do all that administrative work on the front end, and don't let it sneak up on you.
Okay.
And right now they've got specific months where you're allowed to apply, but then there is a provision if you're starting a new service that you can apply for a waiver for a different timeline of application. So, but again, they said those rules may change, and they couldn't guarantee they'd be the same at the time that you were getting ready to start a system.
So it's not that it would be hard to get, it's just that it's administrative and procedural,
Right.
like applying for a lot of things. You just have to jump through the hoops.
Yep.
Talking about having excess or extra equipment. Where do you take an ambulance or a ladder truck to be repaired?
So
there are places that do that.
Yep. There's shops that's what they do for a living. The manufacturers authorized repair shops. So like,
Okay.
for example, where we are in Dallas, Fort Worth, there's a place called Martin Apparatus up in Denton that either sends the repair techs to your station, or, if needed, you go up to them for the larger repairs. But the key is that you have that reserve apparatus for those times that there are the mechanical failures to allow that to occur. So, some departments contract with neighboring agencies that have large fleet that also outsource their fleet services for repairs, and others use the private companies for those apparatus maintenance repairs.
I was going to say, they like when you bring a car in for repair and you can get a loaner?
No, typically not. That's why we recommended the reserve apparatus.
But do you think that would work with having an agreement with a neighboring town that has excess that they keep?
So I have seen that system that you're describing used, where another agency is providing your maintenance, and in times when your apparatus goes out of service, they provide you a loaner, and there's usually a fee associated with that here's how much it costs for each day that you're, for lack of a better term, renting our fire engine.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, I think that's it for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can come back. Peggy, on to you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Welcome.
Yes, hello, Robert. I'd like to talk about a few common sense questions. And one is that I'm aware that Delray Beach has this tier 1 standing in terms of, a national rating. How many actual fire stations are there in the United States, and how many have tier 1? I understand it's like 6-figure number of fire stations and only around 250 tier 1 rated. Is that
You're
accurate?
talking about the being an ISO class 1 agency?
Yes, sir. ISO class 1 is the right.
Yes. So so if you looked at percentage wise, it's less than 5% of fire departments nationally. Now they have changed their standards recently, and we're seeing more class 1 agencies than we have in the past, but it's still a very high recognition and speaks to a number of the systems in place. So fire protection only being one of those systems. There's also how well they do fire prevention services. It's also the communication system involved. There's also, they evaluate training. They also evaluate the road network and the water infrastructure and how well the water supply works. So there's a number of different municipal systems that are evaluated as part of that rating criteria, but it's a very low percentage that achieve class 1.
Okay, thank you. And for the other fire stations who are not class 1, are there ever any really what you would call disasters or small bumps in the road with regard to not being a class 1? I mean, how is this a matter of bragging rights, or is it a matter of, yes, we lost 20 people due to not having a transport in timely fashion?
So
What does it mean exactly in terms of your average person in an average town, please?
So the reason ISO came to light was originally to help set insurance rates for your fire insurance for businesses and residences in an area. And it was the primary tool that insurance companies used for determining rates. If you take it, way back to its infancy, those circles that they used to determine station placement and distance were based on how far a horse could run. So that's how far back you're going to determine what's going on here. So obviously the closer you were to a station, the better your rating was in terms of insured risk. So that's evolved over time, and they look at a number of other different systems, as has the sophistication of the insurance industries and how they rate risk. So they look at a number of different factors, including the local loss history. So looking at your town and the fact that you had 3 fires over the last 3.5 years that actually met the criteria of a structure fire, or a working fire where there was fire loss, shows that you've got very little history, and that would lend itself to better rates. So the system is only built on evaluating those core things, and usually smaller communities find themselves having a little bit of a higher rate because they may or may not have a ladder truck immediately available, which gets points. They may not be able to engage in all the various training requirements that are required. The water system may not be as sophisticated. So working with Delray Beach, obviously you benefit from their rating. Going alone, you guys might, depending on the type of agreements you're able to get in place. If you have automatic aid agreements, so for example, you had your own station, but had automatic aid agreements with Delray Beach, ISO would view that the same as they're automatically dispatched. They're part of your response system. Versus if you have mutual aid agreements where you have to call only in the event that you've arrived on scene, it's definitely a real emergency, and then resources start responding. You don't get the same credit as you do for an automatic aid. But it doesn't necessarily predict the likelihood of the fire department responding effectively to emergencies or disasters. It's just a point structure for insurance rating purposes.
Okay, thank you. I don't recall personally ever being asked for our ISO rating in terms of house insurance. Is that really a factor anymore?
No, you wouldn't be asked for it. The insurance companies subscribe to ISO and get that data directly from them.
Okay, but in terms of not having an ISO tier 1, you're not projecting lives lost and buildings burnt for that. It's a different approach then.
Right. It's just looking at the overall fire protection system, from water supply to stations to apparatus to training to dispatch.
Got it. Thank you. And along those lines, I counted 34 structures in our town, give or take, because I was counting while I was driving, not in traffic. And so we have about 34 structures which are over 7 stories tall or seem to be surrounded by foliage, trees, big trees, vegetation that may not be accessible to a ladder truck, may or may not, because I'm not a professional as these gentlemen are. However, I wanted to state, what is the difference if we have the ladder truck or not have the ladder truck in terms of those structures?
So in terms of your ISO rating, if you've got 3 or more structures 35 feet more in height, you're required to have that aerial apparatus to get maximum points. So an engine company would not get you those ISO points. You would have to have a ladder immediately available. And again, that could be the town responding with an engine company and having a ladder as automatic aid available. So for example, we're working with La Quinta, California, and they have a shared ladder truck with Coachella and Indio, where they all share in the costs, and it's automatically dispatched to any fire in one of the 3 communities. So they still get the credit for having it because it's a first due unit on a fire, whereas they don't have really the need or the risk profile to have it on their own. For your community, with the number of high-rise multifamily living situations you have, it does make good sense to deploy that and have it immediately available as part of your response force.
Okay, thank you. And then the training.
On that same point, though, there is no Florida law or other regulation that requires a town, because we have 34, not 30 buildings, to have a ladder truck. Is that right?
No, you're not required to, no.
No, okay. That's just for ISO, that would be a good gold seal.
But in this proposal, you're saying that we should acquire a ladder truck, correct?
Correct. Based
Yep.
on the risk profile, of the city, we would recommend continuing with your current approach of having that aerial device.
Okay, thank you. All righty. A question about the response times. Was there any data available as to when the Highland Beach truck was out in Delray Beach, where it exactly was dispatched? Did it get dispatched to Western Delray, Middle Delray, Eastern? Did we have a breakdown of
Yeah,
that?
so we did put some heat maps in there that show where the calls are, both within the city and then the calls responded to outside the city or outside the town. So you
The
can
reason
see.
I ask is I didn't see anything related to Delray Beach also answering to the town of Gulfstream. And I wondered if the Highland Beach truck ever was dispatched to the town of Gulfstream, in which case second part of my question would be who was compensated for that trip, or was Delray Beach compensated by both Gulfstream and Highland Beach for the same single trip?
So just in case I'm not understanding the question. So if it was an emergency medical call to Gulfstream and your rescue transported, Delray Beach would keep the revenue from that transport. If the fire apparatus were needed in Gulfstream, there's no charge for that. That's under the mutual aid agreements in the county and between the agencies. So that wouldn't be charged for or revenue received.
Understand, but Delray Beach is in a contract with the town of Gulfstream, and I'm wondering if we had any data on when the Highland Beach truck served the town of Gulfstream?
I can run that. I don't have it specifically available right now, but we can certainly let you know.
Sure, if you could. do
I
that
know
too.
it wasn't something that jumped out and said, wow, they're going to Gulfstream 4 times a day or something.
Sure, just wondered because on the maps provided, the town of Gulfstream is the northeast portion. It's sort of a little zigzag along the coast there and is not included in any map. So I didn't understand where that fell out. Thank you.
Peggy, I can answer the compensation question.
Yes, sir.
We were only compensated for trips within Highland Beach.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I'm just looking for the Gulfstream data, which I didn't see anywhere in the report. Wondered if we answered the calls there. But thank you, Mayor. And I wondered regarding these ambulance medical transport trips also. Historically, I went back through the contracts back to 1990, which Mr. Labadie had provided to me 2 years ago when I requested them. And did you have the data going back that far, 32 years? I think it's now 33 years. And I wondered, in that data, were we ever compensated for the medical transports that the Highland Beach trucks provided? Or were we never transported for 32 years?
No, we did not go back that far. That wasn't part of the scope.
Okay, I didn't know if you had any of that data. Okay, I'd be interested in knowing when, if we ever were compensated for our medical transport. Alrighty, so that can be provided in the future. Give me a second, please. Oh, regarding your, as one of the options, you had stated that looking at the contract to expire, and there were a couple of different options for that. Are you stating that you would recommend allowing the contract to continue until 2026, or you would recommend the 36-month out, or there is the one clause that shows for due good cause, there's a 1 year out. I just wondered if you had looked, sir, at any of those different options, and when you say allowing the contract to expire, at what point were you defining that?
So our guidance was either to plan, if you were to choose to form any one of the various municipal departments, to plan for a 3-year implementation and allow, to be able to give the 3-year notice. You wouldn't be able to effectively get a municipal department up and running with a 1-year notice. So we were looking at that 3-year notice, or just allowing the contract to naturally expire, and that would just expand your ability to plan for and get ready for a municipal department.
Okay, and then if that were the recommendation or a concern, would there be any allowable portion here to renegotiate things such as the medical transport fees, which could be provided back to the town of Highland Beach?
Well, as I would say, that's a legal opinion between you and the town attorney, but
Sure.
All elements of contracts are negotiable. It just depends on what specifically is contained within that contract to allow for negotiations during the terms of the current agreement.
Yes, sir. Thank you. A question on page 8, early on in your report, you had stated, provided our population size. And this issue came up about a year ago. The mayor and I were debating it, but we have the two different figures for approximately 4,000 in off-season and 8,000 in season, and which is really a fair assessment, or are they both just should be taken into account for determining our population?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is when we're determining census block estimates, they're going to be full-time residents, so they're not going to take into account those seasonal swings. Seasonal swings are going to be your best estimates, but I think the important thing about that map on page 10 and the information on pages 8 and 9 is just to know what your demographics look like and to know where your higher population centers are. knowing that that's where your more high rises are, more dense populations can exist. And that's going to be obviously exemplified when it, or, enhanced in terms of the population density during those winter months when your population spikes occur.
Got it. And did you account for, was there any variation in the figures due to the situation of COVID where we really felt that a lot of people didn't leave town when it hit last year and this same time last year? Did that factor in at all, or it's just an ancillary situation?
That's really going to be more of a move forward because we didn't analyze 2020 data. So we were looking at 17, 18, and 19 because the report was, and the analysis occurred during 2020. So that's going to be shown, in now that we're in 2021, if 2020 data is available, that's when you're going to see what those changes might have been.
Okay, true. Okay, question about the 6 stations that make up the city of Delray Beach, including Highland Beach Station. I calculated the mileage, and the headquarters are 4.2 miles to our station, 3.8 to station 112, then 3.1 and 9 miles and 5.4 miles. My question regarding this is, if our truck is out answering Delray Beach or possibly Gulfstream, and we receive a call in Highland Beach necessitating one of these trucks to be dispatched, wouldn't that increase the time to answer Highland Beach? Wouldn't it be more reasonable for Highland Beach, which is situated just about exactly in the middle of town? I think it's 1.7 from the south and 1.5 from the north. Wouldn't it be quicker almost at all times in terms of answer time if Highland Beach answered all Highland Beach based on the mileage alone?
So again, the current model is you're part of a 6-station response system.
Right.
In terms of response time reliability, yes, if your station was to respond to 100% of the calls within your town, you would see faster travel time performance than you would if a Delray Beach station responds into Highland Beach. It's the same situation on if your station is responding to cover an area where a Delray Beach station is out on calls and it's further from right next door to that station, but your station is the next closest resource. The Delray folks are going to see response times, but where that benefits the town is that you've got that ability for 6 stations to respond. You've got that flex, and there also, as I've seen in other contracts, so Pacific Grove, California contracts with the city of Monterey for fire protection. So again, 1 station in Pacific Grove, several stations in Monterey, and they put in a provision in their contract for their station to be a constant staff station. So in the event that it is used for a call, whether in Monterey or within Pacific Grove, then another station moves up into that station to cover while those resources are committed. So again, like with any contract, there are many ways that you can ensure appropriate services are available to the town. That usually comes at a little higher cost because now yours is a constant staff station. So you're being guaranteed staffing, which again, then that would take some of the response reliability away from internally the city of Delray, so that there may be some compensation required for that.
Okay, thank you. And one more question with regards to specialty rescues such as hazmat response and water rescue. I can tell you of the 2 hazmat, one of those was to my street, possibly both. And for water rescue, whether it's intercoastal or ocean, that would be part of, let's say, we do not continue with Delray Beach, possibly, and we adopt one of the other 3 or 4 models, then those special rescues would then be covered by this mutual aid or an assigned aid. Is that how you see that? Or any of these other specialties?
They can be under the mutual aid, the automatic aid, or under a contract agreement to provide those services. they're rare events in the town, so it's not going to be a strain on anything. There's also the county regional resources that are available for those incidents, but you just have to understand with those, obviously response times are slower. So smaller communities like you, what they typically do is they train their personnel to that first responder type level where they've got awareness of and can begin the scene, but they don't have the technician level training, and they're there to begin the operations until those technicians can arrive on scene and take over the emergency call.
Okay, got it. And in that same vein, this might be a question for Chief Tomey, I don't know, but I wondered if Delray Beach, which includes Highland Beach right now, actually answers calls to, say, I-95, where you often see Delray Beach and other local trucks on scene, and also to I think there's 14 parks in the city of Delray Beach, and also lifeguards. I wondered if lifeguards training and stations is all part of the Delray Beach fire package. I don't know if that came up in your research, sir. These are
I would defer to Chief Tomey on that because there's a number of things that are just referred to as administrative costs and those in the contract that don't clearly break out what exactly you're funding with that.
Okay, thank you, because those are, certain elements of a bigger city than Highland Beach, and I wondered where they fall in. All right, thank you so much, sir. That's my question conclusion for now. Thank you.
Chief Tomey, would you care to answer that for us, please? Could you go ahead and repeat that again?
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, Chief. Wondered, when you're in a big town such as yours, bigger than ours, if you're responsible for answering emergencies on I-95, which is a state and or federal highway, the 14 or 15 parks, which are fantastic parks, honestly. And if the lifeguard, ocean rescue, lifeguard towers, and staffing and all this is included in your overall fire budget, is this all part of the whole budget in which we are a part of?
Yes, ma'am, it is. The lifeguards are with the fire department, and we do respond to every square inch of Delray Beach and Highland Beach. So that includes all of our parks, I-95, everything.
Okay, so effectively, the whole package, which we pay a portion of, we're also covering I-95, your parks, the beach, the lifeguards, the lifeguard stands?
No, ma'am. Your budget is for your budget for the actual cost of responding to calls in Highland Beach.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Oh, yep. So
Okay,
your budget is your budget. It doesn't go to pay for anything else that we do in Delray Beach.
Yes, sir. And another question along the lines of ocean and intercoastal rescue, because we have had some, I've lived here 30 years, so we've had some. So how do you respond to, say, an ocean rescue in Highland Beach? We had one a year and a half ago.
Station 116 responds along with a backup unit from Station 113 or 112. And also if the ocean lifeguards are on duty, they'll respond on their 4x4s on the beach side.
Oh, is that right? I wasn't aware of that. Okay, great. And then same question to regard intercoastal rescuing. Do you provide rescue service to the intercoastal?
Yes, ma'am, we do. We just had one recently the other day where we
you did?
responded to an intercoastal rescue.
Does that just go to the C-15 canal then when Boca takes over the intercoastal, or do you have any kind of a direct agreement to that, or it's just like whoever gets there first?
It's not like we would slam on our brakes at the canal and say, no, it's not ours. We're
Throw it
already
in
en route.
reverse.
We're going to go ahead and respond to that and ask for Boca to respond to. That happens on 95 with Boynton Beach and with Boca. We run together with them all the time.
Okay.
We don't necessarily stop at the line.
Got it. That's what I just wanted to clarify, because we've seen the boats out there. And so thank you very much, Chief. I do appreciate it. That's all for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All set? Peggy? Are you all set?
Yes, for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. On to you, Natasha.
Okay, thank you. So what's really important for me in analyzing this is the quality of the services we would end up with any of these alternatives. So the status quo, we obviously know the status of the services and the quality of the services that we receive. Can you speak to, and I think as a group, what I would like for us to do is establish like more specific criteria as far as when we're trying to make a decision or make recommendation, whatever we end up doing, that we come up with a more specific criteria on the type of department that we end up with. So for example, right now we have an ISO rated category number 1 with lots of qualifications that they've earned through education. I would like for us to clarify what type of rated department we are going to end up with. And speaking with my insurance agent about ISO rating and how that would impact us, like my family, as far as getting insurance policies. If we were to have a fire department that was rated anything less than a 3, currently we have 1, if we had anything less than a 3, it would be challenging to get insurance and our rates would go up. So not even talking about the quality of the service that we receive, if we end up with something that is, and this is just my own conversation with my insurance agent, I am happy to do a more thorough analysis, but if we end up with a department or organization that's rated less than, let's say we say 3 or whatever that analysis shows, we could all end up paying more for our own personal insurance than we would have compared to our share in taxes that we're paying. So I think that's another important factor to consider. So I'm throwing it out there that we all specify what type of rated department we are willing to do. And I kind of hear some of the conversation like, well, we've never had such a past experience shows we really haven't had that severe of a incident, or we haven't had the need, for that, that horrible of an accident or whatever. I mean, the pandemic we have had so many unprecedented events in recent history, 1 in 100 year pandemic. What's important to me is that we end up with a department that is a top ranked department, excellent, high level trained. When I hear about for-profit EMS services, I think of what happened in Texas with the for-profit utilities, and it broke down, and the disaster that happened with the freeze that came through Texas. It just throws up these red flags for me when we start talking about, piecing this all together by an EMS going, from for-profit organization, or, I find that very concerning. As I look through the study, my overall concern is that the costs are underestimated. So I mentioned the first one, that I'm concerned that the operational staff of 18 is too low. The second issue, when I looked at the barrier study, and we looked at the EMS, and there was commentary about the EMS, and there was something about needing a medical director for the EMS. I didn't see anything about a medical director in the current study.
So there's language. So in order to get that EMS license to be able to provide service, if you're providing it as a municipality, a medical director is required. We have that factored into that budget at $15,000 annually, which is kind of the low end, limited number of calls, single EMS unit, those types of factors. If you were using a contract provider, you would fall under their medical direction and control, under their medical director and protocols. So that's, again, those administrative things that you wouldn't be responsible for versus doing it as a municipality. So
So in the municipality option, and we do our own EMS, you're saying that medical director would only cost us $15,000 a year?
you're not going to hire a full-time medical director. It's going to be a very part-time thing for him. I can tell you that when I was the EMS coordinator, I was able to work with a local emergency room physician that lived in our town, and he did it free of charge, just as a service to the community. However, as we grew and the Baylor Scott White system grew, they became responsible for medical direction and control, and the 14 agencies in that response system shared in the cost of medical direction and control based on the number of EMS transports that you did annually. But it was still the on-duty emergency room physicians at Baylor that provided the on-call medical control 24 hours, 7 days a week, and the medical director position that we're paying for was shared by the agencies, and it still wasn't a full-time position, even with 13 smaller municipalities participating in the program. So either A, you become one player with a current medical director in the region, and you just become a small part of that pie, or you try to find one on your own if you can get a better deal. But it would likely be more of a regional approach, and we can put more detail in the report to that, other than the fact that you're required to have one.
Okay. So in the municipal option, that first option, like what can you predict what our ISO rating would be?
I would have to look at all those scoring components and try to figure it out. Not off the top of my head. I wouldn't suspect that you're going to be higher than a 3 off the top of my head, but there are areas where you would lose points. And specifically when you look at Del Rey and the type of training they're doing, because they have multi-company evolutions, they're able to do nighttime multi-company evolutions, daytime multi-company evolutions, and those give you maximum training points, whereas single company towns such as yours have to rely on working with other agencies to try to get those points. So those training points are usually limited. Also, the fire prevention area in terms of inspections and those types of things, usually smaller agencies take a little bit of a hit. But in terms of, do you have an aerial, distance from the fire station to the town limits is still going to be, you're going to get the same types of points today that you're currently getting. Palm Beach County Dispatch will get you the same points as any other agency in the county using them for their dispatch. So the other big question would be the water supply points. So we'd have to get an understanding from whoever provides your water service in Public Works that they can explain your water supply to see what kind of points you would get for that. Because whether you have a loop system or various other components play into the point structure on that water supply, which is a big number in terms of the overall ISO rating.
So I can just say I'm
there?
10,
There are 10 levels?
10, yeah.
What
10
effect-
being no fire protection at all. So you're up in a mountain somewhere in the woods, and there's no fire department to serve you.
Mayor?
Oh, I got a
If I may.
follow-up. I'll come
Yes,
back
sir.
to you. What effect would that have, not just on homes, but also on condominium buildings as well as apartments? And how do we find out in advance?
So in short, Mayor, it's going to depend on who the insurer is, because each one of the insurance companies has a different way that they determine their rates.
Okay,
So for example, State Farm, one of the factors is your credit score, but in other insurance agencies, that may not be a factor. So there's just a number of things that go into determining that rate. And ISO, I think the question really then becomes, to what level is ISO factored into your rating criteria?
Okay, so we'll do some research.
Yeah, I think
Maybe-
that's really important research to do. Just like with our hurricane exposure, insurance companies come in and out of the market that
Yeah,
are
sure.
willing to. So not only do we have the hurricane exposure, but if we were to have a lower quality fire department, that is going to add another layer of complexity and even finding insurance
well,
coverage.
In the event that we ended up separating ourselves from Delray, we're not going to be a one. It's not going to happen. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Yeah, Peg.
Yes, sir, Mayor. 2 and 3 years ago, when I was looking into this, I researched the two towns of Tequesta and Lighthouse Point, Florida, both of whom are close in size and make up to Highland Beach. And they both, and I just checked again online, they both fall in the top 3% of the country. So I don't know if that rates as a 1 or a 2, but it would not be a 3, I believe, but I'm not the pro here.
Okay, so that can be part of our research. We can
Yes,
find
sir.
out what some of these other towns are rated at.
They established their own
Yeah.
standalones, and in 2018, I think Marshall had just come on board. They both provided us with data on how they established their own. If you'd like to look it up, that might
Yeah,
help ease
That'll be-
everyone's information lack.
definitely be part
Yes,
of our
sir.
research, but we'll also check with our insurance companies. And well, that's part of what we have to put into the mix.
Yes, sir, and
As
they
part
do
of our
have a contract,
decisions.
they do have contractual agreements in terms of Tequesta with Jupiter and the county in terms of contractual coverage, just not response, backup response.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, still your mic.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you were done.
No, I'm not done. I have some things, so a long list. Is there any cost to mutual aid? So a big component, if we were to do our own municipal fire department, mutual aid is a big component in the response that we would need. So is there any cost to that?
So it's not typical for that to be charged unless there's a large disparity in receiving versus providing, because you want that provision. So for example, if we just use Delray as an example, today you're able to serve a portion of their town that they've identified that the Highland Beach station can get to more quickly. So if you were to form a municipal department as part of that automatic aid agreement, you could say, and we're willing to continue to automatically respond to that area as part of this, so that you don't see the need for constructing another station if that gap in service area would drive that. So that makes you a stronger player in coming to that mutual or automatic aid agreement, because you're able to help offset a need of theirs, and they realize that in the event of a large scale incident in your town, even though they're rare, they would be bringing in more resources less frequently, but you're providing less resources more frequently to them.
So we would still have the same call demand results where half of the Highland Beach calls would be serviced by the Highland Beach apparatus, and our Highland Beach apparatus would still go to Delray Beach. Like there would be no change.
I don't know that it would be the same mix. So that would depend on what their response model looks like. So for example, typically in a situation like that, they would view themselves now as a 5-station system, and the backfill or the secondary response for the station that you're typically covering in Highland Beach today would come from another one of those stations. But if both stations are committed, then maybe you're the third due resource instead of the second due resource. But if they were to stipulate that one small section of their city that you're the automatic aid provider, then those calls would continue. But I would guess that you would see a decline in the total number of responses into Delray.
Okay. So on page 78 of your bigger study, there's an estimated apparatus and equipment cost, the 2.3 million. How is that 2.3 million incorporated into the estimated projected costs by year?
So those figures were resulted at by the county bid through the sheriff's office that has the county bid, and then using the projected lease costs for those apparatus versus outright purchase. So the projected annual lease costs.
So
are rolled into the budget versus a big one-time check for the apparatus.
Okay, yeah, because I didn't understand. Okay, so you've got the 2.3 million is like the present value of those costs. And so when, right, I mean, if you could just confirm what I'm saying. And then, so like fiscal year 2022, you've got this 3.2 million is, the alternative cost for the municipal.
Yeah, and if you look at page 81 at the bottom of that budget table, you'll see the rescue lease payments, reserve engine, ladder, and then the ladder lease payments. So those are factored in there.
Okay, so that 2.3 million is basically those 3 rows, the 108, the 69, the 158. That's the equivalent of the 2.3.
Yeah, that's just to let you know what they would cost if you decided on an outright purchase versus the lease that we budgeted out.
Okay.
Mayor, if I could lend just a little bit of background. A referendum was defeated for the town to purchase a ladder truck. And I think it was about 2016. It was defeated for a $1 million ladder truck purchase. And thereby, the commissioners at that time opted to lease the truck from the city of Delray Beach. I believe it's a 10-year lease with we would take ownership at the end of the lease, which we're partially into, which more than doubled the cost to us. So I just wanted to give you that background. Marshall, do you want to clarify any of that? I don't have the data in front of me.
That's correct, except for it didn't double. They don't, for lack of better words right now, they don't step on the lease payments to take a administrative charge to it. They just pass it through to us.
I see.
So they
Thank
don't
you.
like increase it just because they're handling it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was quantified correctly, because as I went through the study, I felt like there were a lot of things that were underestimated. And so I don't have a good handle on whether or not this 2.3 million that's being estimated. And the other thing I would say is throughout the verbiage, it does say it's like the base model of this, the base model of that. I mean, I think most of us don't get the base model. It ends up costing a lot more. So I'm concerned that these costs are underestimated. They would really end up being a lot more. And I couldn't check that the amounts that are included in each annual projection, if it was equivalent to this 2.3 million. So I don't know, maybe in the future, if you could help us, make sure that that's quantified correctly. I'm concerned that it's underestimated, I guess is.
Yes. So, and to your point, so the sheriff's website on the procurement and the bidding, you can look up fire apparatus and so we're taking a 4-person stick ladder truck, not an aerial platform, not a mid-mount. And you could easily go from that ladder cost if the town were to then choose to go with Sutphin and custom build a ladder truck and go with a company that leases to municipalities. But you could easily take that ladder truck up to $1.6+ million for the ladder truck. You could easily take an engine if you customize it to $750,000. So it really just depends. This is just those numbers are based on the bid on the county sheriff's procurement website.
Okay. And then let's see, I had one more. Our station. Are there any cost estimates factored into the projections? Like, are there any modifications that are needed to our current station in order to go to these models?
In talking with Marshall, it appears that there may be the need to add additional apparatus storage capabilities at the station. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we haven't been there to tour the station, and so we're either going to have to do that virtually or arrange for our facilities person to go on site to look at the site as well as the potential needs for that reserve engine space and the reserve ambulance space if the decision is made to move toward that municipal EMS transport model, because then you would need a frontline and reserve ambulance as well. So to determine what those exact needs would be and what the space allocation is, or if there might be somewhere else in town where those reserve apparatus could be stored and they're only brought over to the fire station if needed.
Okay, so if there are any improvements that are needed to the station, that those cost estimates are not included in these projections.
Not right now, no.
Okay, I mean, my overall concern is the staffing is underestimated, and I think that's at least $600,000 if we think the 22.5 is correct. And I don't know how to reckon, which one's right. I'm not an expert on this. I think there's also several other areas, like another area that I thought was underestimated. They're using this factor of 58.9% to bump up for like benefits and things like that. When I look at some of the documentation that we received last year for financial advisory board for the fringe benefits as it relates to the salary, it was more like a factor of 64%. And so, that was yet another area where it might be underestimated. The capital improvements to our station is not included in these estimates. And these are just things that I found with a quick review of the study. Plus, if the rating from the new fire department is less than what our insurance companies, our homeowners insurance and condo insurance is also going to go up. I just think these are all significant financial factors, and it doesn't even touch on the financial aspects, doesn't even touch on the quality of the service, that we're receiving. So these are all serious concerns that I have.
And we can work with the town finance director on any of these financial matters to make sure that they're either in agreement or if we need to adjust something.
Mayor?
Thanks.
So, and again, the personnel costs were based on the current contract and not the newly negotiated contract. So I think those should be adjusted throughout the models.
Right. Yeah, that'll bring it up slightly.
Mayor?
Who said that?
Me, sorry. Can I make one quick, because
Who are
we
you?
have people watching at home. The town's benefit multiplier is nowhere near 1.64. That's on the Delray side. Ours is more around 0.38, 1.38. So that underestimation may be that they're underestimating the cost of Delray's benefit package, but it isn't the town's. So just,
Right.
I could see that coming out in an email that, the town has this huge multiplier. We don't
We
have
do
that.
not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are some balancing pieces in here, and this is obviously fresh off the press. We're first out of the gate on this. We got a long way to go. Okay. But I think the concerns you brought up are all valid, and we need to get to the bottom of the first concern you brought up, which is the staffing portion and the costs that go along with that staffing portion. So Marshall, please make sure you go through it in detail with Robert and get back to the commission on that. Both the numbers and the detailed dollars behind those numbers. So we got to get comfortable with that out of the get-go because that runs through all three models. Okay. Anytime I look at anything like this, whether it's any kind of a new business enterprise or even something that we're doing to our building, I always throw 10 to 15% contingency on top of whatever the dollars are that we're looking at. So whatever we end up with doing, we always got to think, well, there's something we missed here. Okay. But going back to your original comment, Natasha, in terms of the quality that we need to deliver, we as a group obviously have to decide on that when we finally decide what we're going to do. And this is life safety that we're dealing with. And to a great degree, we are spoiled with what you have been delivering all this time. Okay. And I don't say that with any kind of humor behind it. We're dealing with the life safety issues of our residents. And I'm going to say that over and over again every time we meet and discuss this. So yes, it is a dollar and cents issue, but we have to always concern ourselves with whatever we end up doing. It has to be a quality service, and we have to make sure that we deliver that quality to take care of our residents, plain and simple. Okay. I don't have any specific questions for you, Robert. I've been digesting this all along. I have had it before the rest of the commission because I worked with Marshall and you early on this as well. And the commission, the few questions I had were already asked by my associates here. And we will obviously be back to you with several questions as we go through all of these different options that are in front of us. At this point, we're obviously not ready to select options by any means, but obviously working with our partners in Delray is a key option for us. I personally have no desire to leave them, but we need to sit down with them and talk all of this through. I'm sure Chief has many questions and many observations, so I look forward to meeting with you and going through all of those and see what you think as well. But I would like for us to schedule a get-together with our commission rather soon, while this is hot in all of our minds. I know we have a meeting coming up on the 16th that has a full agenda, so we can't do it then, but I would love to see if we can't find a time directly after that, like the next few days after that, to tackle just this, so we can start talking through the different options that are in front of us here. So if you can look at your calendars and see what we have. When does the Financial Advisory Board meet?
Currently, the Financial Advisory Board is in waiting for the March 22nd date. They'll meet at 2 p.m. So we could, if you need some time, if we find a scheduling conflict, I know that they had also been approached for the 29th, if we need to postpone that a week to find time for ourselves, if that happens. But right now they are circling for the 22nd to meet to discuss this topic as directed by the commission.
Could we meet the morning or the afternoon of the 19th? That would be Friday. Are we available?
It looks like I'm.
No.
We
How
have,
about,
Oh,
How about
you're out of town.
how about Monday, the 22nd?
I'm available.
Are we
I'm good.
Afternoon, say 1:30
So in so doing, we are going to postpone the FAB by a week.
by a week.
Okay. Okay.
Are we all good with that?
22nd at 1:30.
22nd at 1:30? That work for everybody? Beautiful. It's a date.
And Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, so that we're on the same page, as we committed to you at the selection meeting, obviously, if the commission says, you know what, we really want you to drill down deep on option 1, option 4, option 5, and we would also like to see the cost vetted for this option 6 that we think is a mix of A and B, then there's no change in the scope of work. There's no change in the price. We're committed to work with you guys until it's the type of product you need to make an informed decision as a commission.
I lost you. Hit me with that again, please.
We're here for you as long as you need us with no increase in cost.
Thank you, sir.
That nets it out. Mayor, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, please. He's here.
So
Wide open. Just jump in.
I think Vice Mayor Moore has touched on an issue that I've been thinking about. Having been in the high-tech manufacturing world, ISO has been nothing but the greatest headache, expense, aggravation, has brought billion-dollar companies, of which I was an executive vice president, to their knees in their accounting practices, in taking orders, being able to make shipments. It's been a nightmare. And all for being able to put up the banners and say, we're ISO 7,000, 9,000, 10,000 approved. My question to you is, how important is a fire EMS operation? How important is it to be ISO qualified? And are you recommending that we really be ISO qualified for the town of Highland Beach, regardless of the options we follow, except staying with Delray?
So I think the important thing is to differentiate between those two ISO groups. They're completely different organizations. You don't have a choice as a municipality operating fire municipal services. This municipal, and this is the insurance services organization, they rate you no matter what. So it's not that you're ISO 7,000 or 9,000 compliant. They're going to come in and rate you, and they're going to give you a public classification rating of somewhere between a 1 and a 10. 1 being, the best score range you can be in, and 10 being there's no fire protection available in the town whatsoever. So it's a little different. The truth is, like was brought up, you do want to be, 4 or better for sure. Because when you start to get to the latter half, the 5 to the 10s, then you're definitely going to see implications in insurance rates and those, just because there's something in the system that's not working well.
Mayor,
Yes.
I found some data from 2019 I could share that partially answers John's concern. 2019, it was reported on August 1, there were 470,000 fire departments in the United States, and 250 were class 1.
There you are. Congratulations, guys.
You're an exception.
There you go.
And the question is, do we want to spend the kind of money to be on that level? Because do we really need it? There's the other element here. Well, we don't have many fires. We don't have many ocean rescues. We certainly don't have, that many auto accidents, half a dozen. But we do have EMS. That is absolutely top priority.
We'll talk about that on the 22nd.
Yes.
Mayor, if we could request Robert to provide maybe some more data on this classification, the level 1 and 2, because clearly there are an awful lot of fire departments throughout the U.S. who do not have that, and they function very well. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Absolutely. So what would we like Robert to provide when it comes to these classifications?
I guess I have a question. Can we invite Delray Beach to provide any
Yeah, we're going to chat with them, and then they'll provide some information.
today?
Not today.
Oh,
Anything else from anybody?
We could just maybe review our to-do list of what we're hoping to get back from Robert. It would be great in terms of our requests. Mine were Gulfstream, the town of Gulfstream, any data on that?
Marshall?
Just to see have all the,
if you want me to, I'll quickly go through my notes.
Great.
As you know, it's the first time I'm typing them, so I know this is important. We're looking at staffing model. I have that as a big target here. There was questions 18 versus up to 22 and a half. The Highland Beach rig going to Gulfstream, and how I have Gulfstream's contract. It's more simplistic than ours. It's just a flat fee. So Delray just provides service, but I'll provide that to you. Medical transport reimbursement history. I think you'll find our contracts, the last 2 contracts we've had with Delray look very similar in how they're written. So I'm guessing historically, at least in our relationship with Delray, we haven't been collecting medical reimbursements on our equipment outside of the town limits. We're going to see if I can get Robert to add fiscal year 2020 data to the final report. I don't know when that will become available, but we'll get that in there. A couple of the questions were answered as it relates to lifeguard as part of the Delray contract. That's yes. Quality service concerns, as well as establishing a set of parameters by which the commission will use to determine what kind of department it wants.
Well, that's up to us to discuss at
Yes.
this meeting and the meetings after that.
Correct. I'm just
That's
going through
ways
my
down.
notes of what we're going to be coming back to. Medical director information, make sure we get that clarified as it relates to the contract. Glenn and I are also going through the certificate of necessity process with county folks. So we're going to have, hopefully by that time, if we can, get some more information on that process that we, Glenn and I have some legal questions and things of that nature we want to clarify with the county, and then eventually set them up to give a presentation to you on that process. So you know what, that legality, the process, the steps. Yeah, we got to know what that is. ISO rating information. I'm sure Robert can shake the tree and come back with some real good information as to what that means, how it scores, maybe start to classify the number of fire agencies that fall in some of these classes, and can we get to that and achieve some level of ranking?
We need a bit of a tutorial on that. whole
Correct.
process.
Yeah, I guess I'd be interested in the different option, like of the different options that were presented. What's the most likely rating those options would receive, just to be.
What do you mean by that?
So like, for example, we know status quo is ISO rated
12.
number 1. Municipal, the service alternative of municipal. What is the most realistic ISO rating we would end up with if we chose that alternative?
I would think we would want to know what is the one that would produce the best service for our residents first, regardless of the ISO rating. What's going to service our residents the best?
I mean, from what
That's-
perspective?
From life safety, regardless of the ISO rating. That shouldn't drive the bus.
So what would you base that on? What?
Base it on what we think is going to be best for our residents in terms of getting EMS to them faster,
Yeah.
getting the best trained personnel.
Metrics.
ISO rating to me is important, but not the most important.
So what metric are you going to use? What, if we were to go with a municipal, what response time?
Response time, training, getting the best individuals that would want to work here.
Cost.
Cost
That's
to me
a
is
big-
down the line.
I mean, it sounds like
Cost
to
comes
me-
in, but the things I just said to me are more important than cost.
Yeah. But it's response time, not only to the call, but then also getting them to the hospital and
Yeah.
overall treatment.
I'm afraid to say you're going to have to do both, to be
Yeah, I
honest, to
don't-
get
I
the
don't-
best option. You're going to have to look at both.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't see how.
But to
that's
me,
a
I'm not-
huge endeavor.
I'm not that knowledgeable about ISO rating, and therefore, to me, that's not all that important. Now I need to learn more. Maybe it is more important than I think it is.
It may be that when we come up with the list of the services that we want, that blends into the ISO rating. And it may be that it backs into it without looking at it
There may be one and
specifically.
the same.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, but in the bottom line, it comes down to a cost benefit analysis, which is what most things come down to.
That's what it
Right.
is.
How
Yeah.
much are we willing to pay for X service?
Right.
And there may be
And,
things in ISO
You know,
that's
do
not
we
needed.
balance it?
There are some criteria within the ISO rating measurements that we may not need.
And that we can't do anything about.
Yeah, or
Right.
would
Period.
want to do anything about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mayor, also regarding the rating, if a smaller community such as ours contracts with the larger fire and rescue services nearby, if they have a contractual agreement, it improves and increases the ISO rating rather than if we just stood here alone and relied on mutual aid, which is non-contractual.
Yeah, well, see, that makes sense.
Because
But
both the
again,
question, yeah.
I have no knowledge about this, so I need to learn a lot.
If we could get a definition of the parameters of level 1, level 2, level 3, perhaps that would be of use to us, level 4. I'm sure that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's based on your saying that Lighthouse Point and Tequesta have good ratings and they're small communities. I think it would behoove us to get in touch with them and see how they set it up, how that works and how they
Yeah, and
are dealing with it
And
because
we-
they're
look,
similar.
we know people at both places, so it won't be
Yes,
a
sir.
problem learning.
Marshall and I worked to talk to both of them and
Yeah.
019 and 018.
including
He's got the
insurance,
data.
which is your concern about
Right.
insurance and the homes and whatnot, that they have those issues as well. I'm sure they've resolved it. Right now, I'm thinking, look, today, if you look at the numbers and the costs, it's staggering how much money we have to pay Delray for the gold standard. So the question really becomes, boy, if we don't need the gold standard, and if we can then get along with a 7 that satisfies all our safety concerns, health and safety, and it costs us a third less, we've probably hit a home run.
Yeah, I mean, I just would caution you, I mean, I dug into these numbers and I think they're way
I
underestimated.
know you stated several
Way
times, we're
underestimated.
underestimated.
But I think you're banking on this is going to be, we're going to save ourselves a third of the cost, but we're not.
But
You know?
that's what he's gonna give us back, and we're gonna dig into those numbers. This is
gonna
not gonna
find
happen
out.
tomorrow,
Right,
right?
right.
Okay, and the other thing that Peggy wants to know is how many trips went to Gulfstream? Robert,
Yes.
Robert will look that stuff up.
how many trips went to Gulfstream?
And who was compensated?
Well, we were
Wasn't
not
us.
compensated.
I understand, but was Gulfstream remitting to Delray Beach and also
Well, that-
Highland? I mean, I don't know.
What do we care?
I like
I'll
to
send
know.
you a copy of the contract.
That's
Because
none
we
of our
answered it.
business. We don't care.
And what about the option to actually work with Boca as a backup?
I'll say I've had some preliminary conversations with them. They're not interested in entering a relationship similar to what we have with Delray. They're not really interested in doing that. Would they provide some mutual aid on some level? I'm sure they would, and they've expressed they're willing to talk to us and ask those questions. And I would hope, regardless of what happens, Delray would still be willing in some fashion. I don't know. Depends on how we proceed, but I think there are opportunities there. Automatic, I don't know that we're going to be in that position from what I'm hearing today, but we'll keep digging. That's stuff that number one to me is, mutual aid, regardless of what option you go with. We can't have everything here on this little island. So we will need something, and we got to make sure we have it.
And I have one more question. Is ocean rescue costs, are they included in this?
Yeah.
Robert? Are the
Oh,
ocean
no,
rescue and,
So the ocean rescue services are provided as part of it, but you're not billed directly for those.
so if we were to do either of the other options other than status quo, is ocean rescue,
That'd be mutual aid. It would have to be.
it would have to be.
Well, I mean, you
mutual
could
aid.
build it, but you wouldn't build it for that level. So, I mean, having a one-off call, it's not worth building your own ocean rescue team. So you would have to rely on mutual aid.
Okay. So we would have to keep that in mind, the response time for ocean rescue if it was mutual aid instead of, because right now it's automatic.
Keep in mind, the occurrences is like once, maybe every year or two, that you have that need.
Yeah.
But as you said, things can change tomorrow. We could have a hurricane come in and we get wiped out.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from anybody on the commission? Okay, we just move on to comments, sections, but I think we probably commented out. Just anything else from you, John?
The only comment for our consultant, I'm glad that he's mentioned that he will stick with this and continue to work with us at no cost, or at least minimal cost. But it really comes down to the due diligence now to go into the statistics, go into the projections and the costs, and then compare that to the level of service that we would expect as a minimum. We now know what's best. The best is gold standard. And the question is how far we can go down from an expense standpoint and still retain the quality of service pretty much that we have right now. But it seems we had a lot of room here, given the disparity from all of the projections versus the actuals. Not even counting the mistakes and the contract terms and all of that sort of thing. Just even if renegotiation may be, it ain't gonna bring it down that much, maybe. But it would seem we had a lot to work on, and those statistics, those cost projections, that addresses your concerns about and my concerns as well, for all of us. We're concerned about underestimating anything here. The last thing we want is to have an option implemented and we have a problem. Thank you.
Evelyn?
Well, first off, I'd like to welcome Natasha. She's obviously an excellent addition. And I look forward to working with her. Yeah. You know, we have to also keep in mind, I mean, I understand we need to have fire, but most of what we need is EMS. I mean, by a substantial percentage, it's EMS. And maybe that's one of the ways we have to emphasize is that this is what our town needs. Yeah, I mean, but I will tell you that where I live, I'm on the 14th floor. There's no way they're getting to me. It's just not going to happen at this point because they can't come right up to where I am. And I think that's going to be true in a lot of the large buildings. When you're dealing with private homes or smaller buildings, you're talking a whole different animal here. As far as the water system, we do our own water system. So I don't see where the water supply would change because we control it now. We're not putting in new pipes. We're not putting, you know, it is what it is. So I would take that out of the equation because it's a non-starter. This is going to be a long, difficult process because it's very complicated. There are a lot of steps, and let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, please.
Peggy?
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, I did want to add to Marcia's list, if possible, the pension plan that currently we're falling under with Delray Beach, any options for that regarding the the 4 different possibilities of our station. If there are cost-saving methods, I understand if we had more of a mix of younger firefighters and more senior firefighters, that pension might come down considerably or possibly a different plan. No, you don't think so?
No, because we pay in line.
Well, I'm asking for a okay, then we can talk about that another option.
That would be a contractual change, which is a possibility.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. If we could bear that in mind. And also, I on a very small note, I do think there'll be an increased call for Airbnb short-term rental inspections, which could fall under building department, does involve the fire department. And even I found in going through budgets in the past that condos are charged for fire inspections, whereby why wouldn't we provide that service free if we controlled our fire station? Why would we charge our residents when in a downtime scenario that could be provided free of charge?
Good point.
A very small thing, but that means something to some people. Lastly, I'd just like to thank the commission for their ongoing efforts and including me in our next 3 years. I want to add that I've worked, I counted it, and I've worked with 10 different commissioners, single commissioners in the past 3 years. And so I'm very pleased to have a solid set commission going forward. I appreciate everyone's background and skills. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Peg. Thank you.
Yes, I'm super excited to be part of this group. I think it's so cool that each of us have our own different strengths. And I really think it really helps to make the best decision because we're coming at it from different angles. And I just want to emphasize it is, you know, regardless of what happens, I'm really glad that we're doing our due diligence with this because you know, Delray Beach can cancel just as much as we can cancel, right? I mean, they could choose not to renew. So regardless of what happens, we have to do our due diligence because, you know, Delray Beach could cancel and we would have to figure this out anyway. So I'm happy to be part of this analysis. And then I guess one thing that I don't feel like we've talked about is whether or not the consultant is going to give us more specific ideas on how to redo the contract. I know in looking at the previous Barrier Island study, there was a comment in there that said because they were looking at how all the different municipalities would contribute to the cost. And they said it's beneficial to structure the cost based on demand. And I wonder if that's a component that we could factor into our contract. So like in hindsight, now we know half the calls were Highland Beach and half the calls were to Delray Beach. Maybe there's something we can do with call demand and factor that into the contract. I don't know if that's feasible. I don't know if that's anything to do, but maybe that's a way to lower our costs because we're going to other cities. I don't know. So I guess my question is to Matrix is if they would give us some other ideas on how to specifically improve on the contract.
Yes, we can give you those. So I think the important thing about the Barrier Island study is that was all those municipalities coming together to form a Barrier Island Fire Department. So that's how costs should be shared amongst each of those municipalities working together as a group, where calls for service was one of the components. Typically, when you're contracting for services, you don't see that unless it's specifically a call demand situation that's driving the cost. So for example, you're contracting for dispatch services. The only reason the dispatcher is there is to answer calls, and you only drive a certain percentage of the workload for that dispatcher. But there are some fixed costs for Delray to provide services to your city with the number of personnel that they have to assign to the station. So they wouldn't necessarily enter into any kind of a contracting model that on a calls for service basis, because of your lower call demand, would result in essentially the city of Delray Beach supplementing the cost to provide services on the Barrier Island in Highland Beach. So you would want to make sure that, they would want to make sure that the full costs are recouped in terms of providing the service, and they're not losing money and supplementing the town.
Okay.
For me.
Mayor?
Yeah, sure.
I just had one other quick thought, if I could throw it out there.
Please.
Could we ask our Chief Hartman if he has an opinion, or would this be better safe for next meeting on having his police force perhaps be reconfigured as part of the fire safety department, one of our options?
Two things on that.
Yes, sir.
One, I'd like to save it for the next
Sure.
meeting.
Yes,
And
sir.
second, just to give you a little heads up,
Yes.
he's very excited.
Oh, Marshall, if you'll add that on our to-do list. Our chief has sat there the whole meeting, and I don't want to not ask him his opinion because it's very valued and highly regarded.
He's just, I will never speak for him, but I will
Okay.
share that he's just excited that we're going through all of this and that we're attacking the issue.
Great.
And whatever we end up doing, it'll be the best thing for the town.
Great,
That's what he's
absolutely.
excited about.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mayor,
I want to,
one more comment. I promised my last statement, just to read here from ISO. Although the ISO rating is meant to score a fire department's ability to protect the community, it is not a perfect measure of a fire department, as many factors come into play. While it is an honor to receive a high rating, in reality, there isn't anything concrete on the line. This is about the ISO ratings for the fire departments. So I'm just saying it's not, perfect and not necessary that we have the highest rating for ISO. That's all. Thank you.
sounds like another tool, a guide.
Exactly.
Okay. I was just going to say, I want to echo what Evelyn said. Welcome. We look forward to working with you. I look forward to working with you, and you're definitely an additive to our group. And I also echo that everybody brings different backgrounds here, which is wonderful. And we get hot and heavy sometimes and don't quite yell at each other, but we really debate issues with some vigor at times. But when it's over, we're all friends. So that's what's great about it. So welcome aboard. The only thing I want to say about this is don't jump to conclusions. This is going to take us quite a while to figure out what's the best path for our town. Whatever decision we make, it's going to be, I believe, the right one. But the first and foremost is we look forward to working with our partners in Delray. And hopefully we'll come to something that works best for everybody. But now we know some alternatives that might work for us and have some sense of what those costs might be. So we're going to work through all of the different opportunities that Robert has presented, and we'll decide what's best for all of us. And to answer your question, we're going to work with Chief and see what his feelings are on what he's seen here, get his input, so we have the input from everybody, so we can really make some best decisions. Okay? Moving on, anything from council? Well, thank you for joining us in person. Pleasure to see you. Okay, turn it over to Marshall.
No comments, just, again, it's gonna be busy and we'll do our homework and we'll be ready.
Okay, with that, it is 2:53 and we will adjourn. Thank you all.
We do have